From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Everyone, welcome to OpenLine. Glad you are with us tonight on this Tuesday night. It's October 19th, and we are talking about a big problem in Tennessee. We are one of the we have one of the highest rates in the country for domestic violence. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This impacts so many people. We want to talk about it tonight. We have with us via Zoom, our guests are now still on Zoom. We have with us Sharon Roberson. She is the president and CEO of the YWCA of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
And all right, so I was looking over all kinds of stats. We're one of the highest in the country. YWCA is the largest provider of domestic violence services in the entire state. But let's first start with defining it. How do you define domestic violence?
Okay, first of all, I'll start with misconceptions, because a lot of people think this is a personal matter in a household and people are not getting along. And they just think that, it's sort of a strange kind of relationship or love. But at its heart, domestic violence is about power and control. And that's when one person in the relationship wants to exercise power and control over another person. And they will do whatever is necessary to maintain that power. And a lot of times we think of it as the physical. They're just hitting another person or beating another person. But that's just one form of domestic violence, because there's emotional, psychological, and financial domestic violence. And all of those things work together to maintain that power and control over the other person.
And so you see all of that. You see the emotional, you see the financial, because yes, people think about the physical. They think about that aspect of it a lot. But how do those other things manifest themselves? The financial or the emotional?
Well, a lot of times, in order to maintain power and control over another person, you have to so diminish their self-esteem and make them feel as though they do not have any self-worth other than what you give them. That they cannot do anything right, that no one will love them. You isolate them from everyone that's their friend or family member. They cannot do anything without your say-so. So really you gain so much psychological control that really a lot of the survivors will tell you the physical is not the worst part of it, because you get over the physical faster than you get over that emotional and psychological control.
What are the signs, the warning signs, or the signs that this is happening? Let's say you have a friend or a family member, you think it might be happening, you're not sure. What should people be looking for?
There are several signs, but one of the most telling is when an individual appears to not have any autonomy. They are never able to do anything without the permission or presence of this other person. For instance, if you have a girlfriend that you used to always hang out with and have a good time, all of a sudden she dates someone and you can never see her. If that person is constantly looking at their phone, if the person is constantly calling them or texting them. And at the beginning of a relationship, some of these signs may seem as though they really care about you, or they want you to be safe, or you're so wonderful they just love you. And it starts off that way, but then it becomes very controlling and smothering and manipulative. And when you see someone sort of isolating themselves from their friends and family, that is a critical sign that there could be some domestic violence taking place. Isolating
themselves from friends and family. In other words, if they're dating somebody and they're saying they're pulling back from friends, family, that kind of thing, that's a concern. I question, what about... is this something that happens over time, or would you know that this person is an abuser from the first, the initial stages of the relationship? Or is it something that happens 10 years into a relationship?
It can vary. However, there are typical signs that take place even when you first meet one of these individuals. One is a history of doing that with someone else. That right there sounds obvious, but it is not to many, because a lot of women want to believe they're special. And the reason I use male and female, because it's about 90, 10, or 85 to 15%. So most of this is done by men against women, although men can be victims of domestic violence. And so it starts off typically okay. It starts off, in fact, wonderful. And that's why a lot of women will stay, because they want to get back to those good days. They want to know that person that they initially met that was a wonderful person to be with. But that is just really the grooming phase. You're getting control over a person, and all of a sudden it just spins out of control. And then it goes back into a cycle of apologies, and that's why they call it a power and control wheel. Because once the power is regained, then things get better. But as soon as the power is threatened and controlled, you're back to the bad behavior.
What is the typical profile of an abuser, somebody who would do this? Is it something they do with just one person, or would it be something they would do in every relationship they get into? And kind of what is the background and typical profile?
It's difficult to really pinpoint any typical, because things vary. However, we do know that children who witness domestic violence, unfortunately, the girls tend to end up being victims and the boys tend to end up being abusers. And that sounds sort of strange, because there may be those who did not like it when it occurred when they were children, but that is the way that they've learned to understand relationships. And that's why it's very important to intervene and make sure children who witness domestic violence do get some help so that they don't repeat this, because it becomes how love looks. And there are some women that have grown up because of domestic violence in their households to think that he doesn't love you unless he does hit you, or this is the fate of women. And so the abusers can look different. However, they're all people that have issues with feeling powerless, and therefore they have to control another individual.
I have seen this stat for a long time, that Tennessee is one of the highest states in the country for domestic violence. It seems like that is a stat that has been out there for a while. And so as far as you, as somebody who's on the front lines of this, do you feel like we are making progress in stopping this, or is the battle just to get people who are in the midst of this out of that situation? In other words, can we really turn the corner and heal this, or is it just a constant situation of trying to extricate those who are in it out of it?
I think it's a little of both, because we definitely want to save lives. And we have an emergency shelter, the Weaver Domestic Violence Center, and it's 65 beds. And when people are in crisis, they need that immediate, confidential shelter where they can be safe. But more importantly, I guess we're making a little bit of progress. Tennessee used to be 5th in the nation at the rate that men kill women. Now we're 10. Now 10 is not great, but it's better than 5. And so that, unfortunately, is our statistic. And 1 in 4 women across the country will be victims of domestic violence. We were at a vigil today at our Weaver Center for the women that are there, because it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we wanted the women there to be able to tell their stories. And one thing we found out is that if you look across the country, the data shows that for every 20 women that are killed by a man, 19 of those women knew this man. Now, that may not have been an intimate partner relationship, but there's some sort of relationship there. And so it is typically someone that you know. And I think that one thing we have to do, if we do anything, is build up better people. We have to look at the kind of culture that exists in the society that builds these sort of characters and individuals. And we're going to be larger here in Tennessee, especially in the metropolitan area of Nashville. And so we're going to have to work at this, or else we're going to have some of the larger city issues of even more violence.
And you may have hit on this, but what is the culture that builds up this type of person who would be an abuser? What are the things that does this?
It's really what we view in the field as toxic masculinity. It's this feeling that men have to control, that they have to be in this power position. But let's say you don't have power at your job, you don't have power in society, no one else looks, and you can't control anyone else. but you will control this individual, because that feeds into your view of how men are supposed to be. Men are supposed to be large and in charge. If you are not, you have a need to have that power over another person.
How likely is it, and I think it's likely, that someone who's watching the show right now is involved in this situation and is in need of some kind of help?
Very much so. There's never a show, as we say, 1 in 4 women. And a lot of women don't really know that they are in a relationship that is a domestic violence relationship, because they may not understand that, especially when it isn't physical. If you only think it's physical, then you really have missed part of it. And it evolved. They can evolve from the emotional, psychological, financial to the physical. But let's say you have a job, but you cannot use any of your money for anything that you want. That is domestic violence. That's financial violence. And there are many people in that circumstance, and they may not realize it. Let's say you cannot wear the clothes you want to wear. It's almost being placed in a dysfunctional childlike state, but you're an adult. And so that you really have to look at whether or not that is a valid way to live, I guess is the best way of putting it.
And a person in that situation, they should do what right now?
Well, it depends. And it really is, you have to have your own power. You can call the YWCA crisis line. Let's say that you do not like the relationship you're in. But first of all, before you change your circumstance, you have to make sure you have a safety plan. And the reason for that is more women are killed when they try to leave. People tell you, leave, leave, leave. But that is when you're most at risk. Why? Because that is when the abuser is losing their power and control over you. So you can call 1-800-334-4628. Now make sure you're in a safe place when you call that number. And if you call that number, there's an individual crisis counselor based on your specific circumstance can help you develop a safety plan. If you decide to stay, which is understandable because it's a very complex issue, then they can tell you how to remain safe and the signs where a circumstance could become lethal. Because there are certain things that someone can do to you, especially the violent form of domestic violence, that can lead you to losing your life. And we know those signs. We also have a text line, because often it's easier to use a texting versus to call. And that's 615-983-5170. So get help. You may have a family member. You may not be the person that's in a domestic violence relationship, but you have a suspicions that a friend or relative does. You can call that number, and these are all confidential calls, and you can get information about how to help them, because that's the best thing a family member can do, is to educate themselves about domestic violence.
I want to take a break and then come back and talk about somebody who's in that situation. They believe that there's a family member who may be in trouble. They're not sure. What sort of conversation do you have? And I know there's a big concern about victim blaming, questions that could be along those lines that could lead the person to kind of clam up and not talk about what's really happening. So if you want to call in, the number, I believe, is there. It's 615-737-PLUS. Look, there it is, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Give us a call. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.